You know their face. They're the one holding it together when everything's falling apart. The calm in the crisis, the silent rock in the room full of crashing waves. To the outside world, they're the strong one, the one who never complains, who always has time, who absorbs everyone else's pain without ever showing a crack. But what if I told you that strength wasn't a choice? What if it was a mask? Assigned, not chosen, expected, not respected. Carl Jung called this external armor the persona, a carefully constructed identity we wear to survive the expectations of the world. And for empaths, that persona is often forged in silence, not because they want to seem strong, but because they believe they have no other option. The mask begins early. A child notices that when they speak softly, the room stays calm, so when they hold their pain, adults praise their maturity. When they comfort others, they are called kind. Slowly, they learn that love is given in exchange for composure. So they adapt. They learn to swallow panic, to smile through grief, to carry others without asking to be carried. And over time, people stop asking how they are at all. They see only the surface, the helper, the healer, the unbreakable one. And so the mask tightens. Let's meet someone behind that mask. His name is Daniel. He's a team lead in a crisis response unit, respected, grounded, calm under fire. When a co-worker cries in the stairwell, he's there. When a deadline spirals, he stays late. His inbox is filled with, "Thank you, I couldn't have done this without you." But no one knows that Daniel cries in the shower every morning before work, that his chest tightens when he hears his phone buzz, that some nights he stares at the ceiling, wondering if anyone sees him beyond his usefulness. His strength is not strength. It's performance. It's survival. And the applause that follows it feels more like pressure than praise. This is where the irony stings. The more composed an empath appears, the less people believe they can fall apart. So when they finally do, when the mask slips, when the voice shakes, when the tears come, people react not with empathy, but confusion. You, struggling, but you're always so strong. They see the crack, not the pressure that caused it. Jung wrote, "The persona is that which in reality one is not, but which oneself as well as others think one is." The danger is not just that the world believes the mask. It's that the empath begins to believe it too. They forget that strength without rest becomes a burden. That silence isn't the same as peace. That being the strong one doesn't mean you're unbreakable. It just means no one's looking close enough. What happens when the persona becomes your prison? When every "I'm fine" becomes another brick in a wall you can't climb out of. There's no dramatic explosion. Often, it's a quiet collapse. Missed calls, a dropped smile, a slow fading into the background. But by then, the damage is deep. Because the longer the mask is worn, the more fragile the person beneath it becomes. And when the world only loves the version of you that never asks for help, breaking feels like betrayal. Here's the truth most people don't want to hear. The strongest person in the room is often the most exhausted. And sometimes, all they want is for someone to notice without them having to say a word. When you're always the strong one, no one asks if you're okay. They say the kindest people hold the deepest rage, not because they are cruel, but because they've spent years burying their own pain to carry the weight of others. This is the quiet tragedy of the empath. Beneath their warmth lies something darker, unspoken, but powerful, a shadow that has been silenced for far too long. Carl Jung described the shadow as the hidden part of the psyche, the thoughts, emotions, and desires we reject because they don't fit the image we want the world to see. For empaths, the shadow isn't filled with malice or evil. It's filled with exhaustion, with swallowed needs, with the guilt of daring to feel resentment after giving too much. The irony. The very qualities that make empaths so loved, their patience, their grace, their selflessness, are often born from survival, not choice. Somewhere along the way, many learned that love had to be earned, that affection was conditional, that if they weren't useful, they wouldn't be kept. Consider Theo, a school administrator everyone adored. He was the fixer, the mediator, the one who remembered every birthday and always offered a listening ear. No one knew that Theo hadn't taken a real vacation in 8 years, that his own marriage was crumbling under the weight of his emotional absence at home. He had become a mirror for everyone's problems, but no one thought to ask what his reflection looked like when he was alone. Until one day, Theo simply stopped showing up. No call, no warning. And when he returned a week later, he was different. Sharper. Quieter. "Are you okay?" they asked, confused. "You've always been the strong one." But they didn't see what had been simmering beneath the surface for years. His outburst in the staff meeting weeks later wasn't about the faulty printer. It was the voice of the shadow finally breaking through. Jung wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." Empaths often mistake this internal erosion as destiny. Failed friendships, one-sided partnerships, endless burnout. But it isn't fate. It's the consequence of ignoring their own soul. The parts of them they've hidden, the anger at being taken for granted, the grief of never feeling chosen, the need to be cared for instead of always caring, begin to rot inside. And when it surfaces, it doesn't ask permission. It just arrives. A breakdown, a cold withdrawal, a silence that unnerves everyone who only ever knew them as gentle. And that's the painful irony. The people who benefited most from the empath's giving nature are often the least equipped to witness their transformation. They recoil from the shadow. They label it selfish, unlike you, dramatic. But the truth is, they were never seeing the real person. Only the role. The caregiver, the sponge, the savior. And now that the mask is slipping, the shadow is stepping into the light, not to destroy, but to reclaim what was lost. Because nothing buried stays buried. And the empath's healing begins not when they suppress the shadow, but when they listen to it, when they ask, "What am I hiding? What do I need? Who would I be if I stopped sacrificing myself to be loved?" This is the fork in the road. To keep pretending, or to finally be seen. The part of you you hide will one day demand to be seen. It never begins with fireworks. The mask doesn't shatter in some dramatic scene. More often, it slips in silence. A quiet pause. A text left unanswered. A smile that doesn't reach the eyes. The empath doesn't announce their breaking point. They vanish from the role before anyone realizes there even was one. That's how invisible the wound has always been. For years, they were the one everyone leaned on, until one day they leaned back, and no one was there. This moment is not a breakdown, it's a revelation. Carl Jung once said, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul." Empaths wear masks to survive, a carefully crafted persona of peace, patience, and predictability. They serve as the unshakable calm in the room, the sponge that soaks up chaos. But underneath, their shadow stirs. This shadow, the part of themselves they've buried, holds the exhaustion, the unmet needs, the long silent scream that says, "See me, not just what I do for you, but who I am." Take Mila. Everyone calls her the group's emotional glue, the helper, the listener, the one who always knows what to say. When her friend Jonah was suicidal, she stayed on the phone until sunrise. When her sister fell into depression, Mila took unpaid leave to care for her. At work, she was the silent firefighter, extinguishing conflict without anyone asking. But no one noticed that Mila hadn't cried in years, that she couldn't remember the last time someone asked her how she was doing. Her boss praised her unshakable poise, but never saw her clenching her jaw through meetings. Her friends loved her calm vibe. but never heard her voice tremble when she was alone. Then, one day, Mila went silent. She stopped replying to messages, cancelled plans, showed up late and left early. When she did appear, her signature warmth was gone, replaced by stillness. Blank eyes. No mask, and that scared everyone. "Are you okay?" they asked with frantic concern. But what they really meant was, "Where is the version of you that makes us comfortable?" They didn't realize she'd been breaking for years. They just finally noticed when she stopped hiding it. This is the paradox of the empath. The stronger the mask, the more invisible the pain beneath it becomes. When the mask slips, it doesn't just reveal burnout. It reveals how many people only love the role, not the person. Jung warned of this illusion when he wrote about the persona, the mask we wear to meet the world's expectations. But when that mask becomes fused with our identity, the cost is enormous. The world praises the performance, while the performer slowly disappears. The moment the empath drops their mask, they are no longer useful in the way others expect. And that's when the room grows cold. People withdraw, confused. Some even get angry. "You've changed," they say. "You're not like you used to be." But they're wrong. The empath isn't changing, they're returning to themselves. Mila's silence wasn't weakness. It wasn't a mental collapse. It was a boundary. The first real one she'd ever set. But by then, it was too late for certain relationships. Some people leave, not because they were bad, but because they were only ever in love with her mask. This is the moment the empath realizes the terrible irony. The more they gave, the less they were truly seen. And when they finally ask for space, they're met with confusion or guilt. But that mask, cracked and fallen, becomes the first glimpse of truth. A truth that burns, but frees. Have you seen your own mask slip under pressure? Some of the most broken people you'll ever meet never show a crack. They smile, they listen, they give, and they keep giving until they vanish. This is the empath as the wounded healer, an archetype Carl Jung identified as someone who becomes a healer because they themselves have been wounded. But here's the paradox. The deeper the wound, the more they feel compelled to help others, and the less likely they are to seek help for themselves. At first, it feels noble, purposeful, but slowly, silently, it becomes a prison of invisibility. Jung believed that true healing begins when we turn inward, when we dare to face the unresolved pain within ourselves. But for the empath, inward feels dangerous. It means admitting they are not okay, that they're not the rock, not the endless well, not the hero everyone assumes. And so they bury their own needs to maintain the illusion of strength. This illusion is not just for others, it becomes part of their identity. Over time, they confuse being needed with being loved. Consider Ray, a veteran trauma counselor. For 2 decades, he's sat with people in their worst moments: addiction, abuse, grief. He never breaks, never falters. He's the one his colleagues go to when their own caseload gets too heavy. No one asks Ray how he's doing, and Ray never tells. Until one day, he collapses during a group session. Not physically, but emotionally. He goes quiet, withdraws. And when a colleague tries to reach out, Ray finally says, "I know how to hold others. I just don't know how to let myself be held." This is the silent collapse of the wounded healer. No one saw it coming, not because Ray was deceptive, but because he was devoted. Devoted to staying strong. Devoted to being the safe place. But even steel bends under enough pressure, and when the healer breaks, the world around them often doesn't know how to respond because they've built their role so well, so completely, that no one has ever seen the human behind the helper. Jung wrote, "The doctor is effective only when he himself is affected. Only the wounded physician heals." But he also warned, if the healer avoids their own pain, their gift can become a curse. Empaths absorb others' wounds so easily because their own were never witnessed. They were praised too early for being mature, so understanding, wise beyond their years. But behind that praise was often neglect, silence, a childhood where emotions were inconvenient. So they adapted by becoming useful, by becoming what everyone else needed, until they forgot what they needed themselves. There is a mystery in how well some people can sense your sorrow without ever revealing their own. That mystery is often trauma disguised as intuition. But here's the irony. The better they are at understanding others, the less they feel understood. And because they rarely express their own vulnerability, people assume they don't have any. The real tragedy of the wounded healer isn't just burnout, it's emotional starvation. They give from a place of deep need, hoping that someone will finally notice their unspoken pain. But most don't, not because they're cruel, but because the empath is too good at hiding it. So how does the healer begin to heal? By making the invisible visible. By turning inward, not in isolation, but with intention. Through therapy, through rest, through the terrifying, beautiful act of saying, I'm not okay, and I deserve care too. Only then does individuation begin, the path back to the whole self, not just the useful self. Because in the end, the strongest person in the room isn't the one who carries everyone else. It's the one brave enough to finally put their own heart in their hands and say, this matters too. The strongest person in the room is often the most unseen. It doesn't always erupt with screaming or slamming doors. Sometimes a breaking point looks like silence. A door gently closed instead of slammed. A phone not answered. A smile not forced. For the empath, this is the moment the mask slips, not in chaos, but in quiet defiance. It's the refusal to continue carrying what was never theirs to hold. And to everyone else, it looks strange, sudden, uncharacteristic. But to the empath, it feels like the first breath after years of drowning. Carl Jung called this moment the beginning of individuation, the sacred process of becoming whole. For the empath, it is the turning point when they stop living as the emotional backbone of every room and begin to search for the spine within themselves. The journey inward is terrifying. After all, they have spent years perfecting a role, the strong one, the calm one, the fixer. But beneath that persona lies a shadow, one full of exhaustion, repressed anger, unmet needs, and a quiet desperation to be seen not as a savior, but as a soul. Take Mason, a school counselor in his mid-30s. Everyone said he had a gift. Students confided in him. Teachers leaned on him. Parents sent thank-you letters. He never said no, never missed a crisis. But at home, Mason sat in darkness. Not dramatic, just blank. One day, he didn't show up to work. No warning, no meltdown, just stillness. When his principal called, Mason didn't pick up. When a student emailed, he didn't reply. His inbox filled with concerned messages, but he felt nothing. It wasn't that he didn't care. It was that he had cared too much, too long, without space to feel anything for himself. His silence wasn't rebellion. It was survival. The dramatic irony is this. Those who loved him most didn't notice he was fading until he vanished. His strength had become their dependency. And when that strength paused, just paused, their world shook. Jung once said, "There is no coming to consciousness without pain." Mason had begun waking up, not to destruction, but to possibility. That possibility came with grief. Grief for how long he had stayed silent, for how many times he'd prioritized others over his own soul, but also a strange new peace. Because in that stillness, he met the part of himself he had buried, the one who needed care too. Breaking is not failure, it's the beginning of awareness. The empath's quiet refusal is not rejection, it's a reclamation. A spiritual boundary drawn not in anger, but in truth. When they stop explaining, stop apologizing, stop mending everyone else's broken pieces, they begin to gather their own. They are not abandoning the world, they are re-entering it as a full person, not just a reflection. In Jungian terms, the persona is shedding. The mask crafted to navigate others is falling away, revealing a face beneath that is vulnerable, aching, and real. It's in this moment that the empath discovers what Jung meant when he wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." And that discovery doesn't come in a storm, it comes in silence, in stillness, in that sacred breath after the collapse. Sometimes breaking isn't the end, it's your first honest breath. There's a quiet war happening inside the empath, one you rarely see but always feel in the aftermath. It's the kind of war that doesn't show up in shouting matches or thrown objects. Instead, it's felt in the long silences, in the forced smiles, in the way someone suddenly goes numb after years of being the emotional backbone for everyone else. At the center of this war stand two opposing forces, the persona and the shadow. The persona, as Carl Jung described, is the social mask we wear, the face we show the world to survive in it. For empaths, that mask is almost always kindness, calm, compassion, the ability to listen without interrupting, to soothe without needing to be soothed. It becomes their identity, the strong one, the healer, the one who never breaks. But what if I told you that beneath that carefully sculpted surface, something else is screaming? That something is the shadow, the buried, unseen, unwanted parts of the self. Rage, resentment, envy, exhaustion. For the empath, the shadow forms when they constantly push their own feelings aside in favor of others. They learn early, sometimes through trauma, sometimes through conditioning, that their emotions are secondary, that love is earned by being useful, being needed, never being a burden. So they put on the mask. And over time, they forget it's a mask at all. Tyler was one of those people, a high school counselor, loved by students and staff alike. He was the guy who stayed late, who ran support groups for teens who self-harmed, who never raised his voice. A pillar. But behind closed doors, Tyler admitted to a friend, "I help teens every day, but when I'm alone, I feel like a ghost." His wife told him she couldn't remember the last time he cried or even shared something vulnerable. The deeper irony, Tyler taught emotional regulation, but didn't practice it for himself. He was the calmest man in the building, and the loneliest. Carl Jung once warned, people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul. And this is the tragic paradox for the empath. In trying to be good, they split themselves. They repress the anger that says, "Why is no one checking on me?" They swallow the grief that says, "I feel invisible." And in doing so, they become fragmented, disconnected from their own needs. Their body stays present, but their soul begins to drift. What makes this even more dangerous is how normal it looks from the outside. The empath seems composed, helpful, even fulfilled, but inside, the unacknowledged shadow is growing louder, and like pressure in a sealed jar, it eventually explodes. Sometimes that explosion looks like a panic attack, sometimes like a quiet divorce, sometimes like total burnout. The shadow doesn't care how noble your intentions were. It demands integration. Jung taught that healing requires not perfection, but wholeness. And wholeness only comes when we stop choosing between parts of ourselves. The empath must learn that their anger is not evil, that their resentment is a signal, not a shame, that their exhaustion is not weakness, but a call for change. Integration isn't about becoming less kind. It's about becoming more real. To look at your shadow and say, "I see you, you belong too." Tyler eventually took a sabbatical. He started therapy. He told his students he needed time to take care of himself, and for the first time, he let others show up for him. The students still sent messages, but now they said, "Thank you for teaching me that even helpers need help." That's what happens when the war inside finds a truce. And so we arrive at a difficult truth. The parts you hide aren't your enemy, they're your unfinished truth. Some cages aren't made of bars, they're made of compliments. You're so kind, you're so reliable, you're such a good person. To most, those words sound like praise, but to the empath, they often feel like chains, because with every pat on the back comes a silent expectation. Don't change, don't stop, don't say no. Carl Jung called this kind of dynamic a false individuation, a state where the self isn't truly discovered, but manufactured to meet others' needs. And when being good becomes your identity, your truth starts to rot in silence. Take Jordan, for example, a quiet, dependable man. He never forgot a birthday. He always stayed late to help at work. He listened to his partner's every dream with unshakable patience. But over the years, his own dreams began to wither. He never shared them, never asked for anything in return, not because he didn't have desires, but because he believed asking made him selfish. His goodness became currency, traded for belonging. But here's the twist. No one asked him to disappear. He just assumed that to be loved, he had to. That's the quiet tragedy of many empaths. They erase themselves preemptively, hoping the world will love the outline left behind. Jung warned the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. For the empath, this means confronting the shadow side of their goodness, the bitterness that creeps in after years of being unseen. The quiet rage buried beneath politeness, the grief of never being chosen, not even by themselves. Jordan's breaking point came not through a grand confrontation, but a forgotten coffee order. His partner got theirs. His was missing. He didn't yell. He didn't cry. He just sat there, staring at the cup that never came, feeling like it symbolized every part of his life that had been overlooked. He wasn't angry about the coffee. He was mourning his own absence in his own life. This is the dramatic irony that haunts the empath's journey. The world praises them for being easy to love, while never really seeing who they are. The partner loves their support but never asks about their silence. The boss values their consistency but never notices their exhaustion. The friend vents endlessly but never wonders, "How are you really?" The empath becomes everyone's safe space, and in doing so, has nowhere safe to fall themselves. And so, the mask of goodness stays on, the smile stays painted, until one day the soul rebels, and it often erupts in a way that others find irrational. An outburst, a shutdown, a coldness that feels foreign. But this isn't a personality shift, it's a rescue mission. The self, buried under years of being the good one, is finally clawing its way back to the surface. Carl Jung believed that we cannot change anything until we accept it. Condemnation does not liberate, it oppresses. And what so many empaths must accept is that their goodness is not bad, but it cannot come at the cost of their wholeness. The world doesn't fall apart when they say no. Love does not vanish when they assert a boundary. And peace isn't always found in silence. Sometimes it's found in choosing yourself, out loud. Real love, Jung would say, does not require self-erasure. It welcomes contradiction, complexity, humanity, and most importantly, truth. Comment if you've ever watched someone shrink themselves to keep the peace. Being the good one shouldn't mean disappearing. Sometimes the most invisible people in the room are the ones who make everyone else feel seen. Empaths often carry this gift, a quiet ability to reflect others' emotions so clearly. It's as if they've become a mirror. But here's the trap. When you spend your life reflecting others, you forget how to see yourself. Carl Jung called this the archetype of the mirror, those who unconsciously absorb and echo the feelings, needs, and identities of those around them. And while this may look like compassion, it can slowly become self-erasure. Bit by bit, the empath vanishes behind everyone else's image. At first, it doesn't feel like losing yourself. It feels like connection. At work, an empath like Evan becomes the go-to for reading the room. If the boss is irritable, Evan adjusts his tone, carries the meeting, and absorbs the tension without complaint. His co-workers admire his emotional intelligence, but none of them know that when Evan gets home, he stares blankly at the wall, unsure who he is when no one needs him. His weekends blur into silence. He avoids mirrors. There's nothing behind his eyes but fatigue. This is the quiet fate of the empathic mirror, becoming a chameleon. With friends, they adapt. With partners, they mold. With parents, they perform. It's not deception, it's survival. Many empaths learned early in life that harmony meant safety, that being too loud, too sad, too different would threaten their belonging. So they shapeshift, smile, nurture, reflect. But every act of mirroring comes at a cost: identity. Jung warned the greatest tragedy of the family is the unlived lives of the parents. But for empaths, it's often the unlived life of the self, traded away for peace. This archetype becomes most dangerous in midlife. When roles begin to crack and old identities no longer fit, empaths face a terrifying void. Who am I when no one else is in the room? When Evan's relationship ended, his friend group shifted, and his job changed hands. He found himself spiraling, not because of loss, but because he had no idea what he wanted, what he needed, what he believed. He had been the mirror for so long, he'd forgotten what his own face looked like. His reflection had always belonged to someone else. Jung called this moment the call to individuation, a psychological crisis that is also a chance at rebirth. But to answer it, the empath must stop asking, "What do you need from me?" and start asking, "What do I need from life?" That question terrifies the mirror. It feels selfish, rebellious, even dangerous, but it is the path to wholeness. The mirror must become a window, clear, so open, and finally facing inward. There's dramatic irony here, too. The world that relied on the empath's adaptability often recoils when they finally say no. When Evan stopped answering calls at midnight, people said he was cold. When he expressed frustration, they said he'd changed. But the truth was, he had appeared constant only because he disappeared into everyone else. His crisis wasn't collapse, it was emergence. The mirror was cracking, not to break, but to reveal. Jung once said, "In each of us there is another whom we do not know." For empaths, that unknown self is the one who never got to speak, never got to choose. And now he knocks. Not violently, just persistently, asking, "Can you see me yet?" To become whole, the empath must turn away from the endless reflecting and toward that voice. Because at the end of the day, the world doesn't need more mirrors. It needs people who know who they are, people who can hold their ground and their empathy. That's the paradox. The strongest mirrors are not those who reflect, but those who remember what they themselves look like. You don't owe everyone a reflection. You owe yourself a face. It starts so quietly, you don't even notice it. At first, people say you're calming, easy to talk to. "You just get me," they say, as if you have some supernatural ability to soothe chaos. And maybe you do. But here's the twist. The more calm you offer, the more others begin to need it. Soon, you're not just a friend, a partner, a co-worker. You're their emotional anchor, their unofficial therapist. The person they vent to, cry to, depend on. Not because you asked for that role, but because they assigned it to you. This is the hidden force of projection. Carl Jung warned, projections change the world into the replica of one's own unknown face. What people see in you may not be who you are, it's what they're missing in themselves. Take Jamal, for instance, a soft-spoken team lead at a non-profit. He never raised his voice, never complained, always knew how to step in when someone was struggling. Over time, his office became the place people came to cry, to confess, to unload. Even his boss relied on him to keep the emotional culture healthy. But what no one saw was that Jamal hadn't slept well in weeks. His chest felt tight every morning. He'd begun dreading messages, afraid it was just another person who needed more from him. When he finally told his team he needed a mental health week, the response wasn't supportive. It was confusion. "But you're the strong one. You're abandoning us." No one meant to be cruel, but they had confused his calm with capacity, his kindness with infinite strength, and they were furious to find out he was human too. This is the cost of projection. When someone sees your calm and overlays it with their longing for stability, they stop seeing you. You become a symbol, a rock. And if you move, even slightly, they panic. They accuse you of changing, when in truth you've been shifting for a long time, just silently. Jung believed projection was one of the most dangerous psychological forces because it robs people of their autonomy and robs you of your identity. In this warped mirror, your value lies not in who you are, but in what others extract from you. And here's the deeper tragedy. Empaths often internalize these projections. They begin to believe that their worth really does depend on how steady, available, and emotionally invincible they seem. They silence their pain. They laugh off their limits. They push through exhaustion, not for glory, but to avoid disappointing the people who expect them to always hold the weight. But what happens when they can't? What happens when they finally whisper, "I'm not okay," and the room goes cold? When Jamal returned to work, something had changed, not in him, but in them. Some colleagues avoided him, others treated him like he'd failed a sacred duty. Only a few asked how he really was. And that was the revelation. Many didn't love him, they loved the emotional function he served. His boundary had exposed their dependency. Their panic revealed the projection, and as painful as that truth was, it was also freeing. Because for the first time, Jamal understood this wasn't about him. It never was. So ask yourself, have you ever been punished for finally speaking up? Have you ever watched someone turn cold the moment you stopped being their anchor? That's projection unraveling. That's the cost of being the symbol instead of the self. Jung wrote, "The greatest burden a child must bear is the unlived life of the parents." But in adulthood, that burden shifts. It becomes the unlived emotional life of everyone around you, placed quietly on your shoulders. You don't owe anyone your silence. You don't have to be their emotional lifeboat just because they never learned how to swim. And if walking away makes you the villain in their story, so be it. That story was never yours to carry. When people only love your strength, they don't really see you. It starts so quietly, you don't even notice it. At first, people say you're calming, easy to talk to. "You just get me," they say, as if you have some supernatural ability to soothe chaos. And maybe you do. But here's the twist. The more calm you offer, the more others begin to need it. Soon, you're not just a friend, a partner, a co-worker. You're their emotional anchor, their unofficial therapist, the person they vent to, cry to, depend on. Not because you asked for that role, but because they assigned it to you. This is the hidden force of projection. Carl Jung warned, projections change the world into the replica of one's own unknown face. What people see in you may not be who you are. It's what they're missing in themselves. Take Jamal, for instance, a soft-spoken team lead at a non-profit. He never raised his voice, never complained, always knew how to step in when someone was struggling. Over time, his office became the place people came to cry, to confess, to unload. Even his boss relied on him to keep the emotional culture healthy. But what no one saw was that Jamal hadn't slept well in weeks. His chest felt tight every morning. He'd begun dreading messages, afraid it was just another person who needed more from him. When he finally told his team he needed a mental health week, the response wasn't supportive. It was confusion. "But you're the strong one. You're abandoning us." No one meant to be cruel, but they had confused his calm with capacity, his kindness with infinite strength. And they were furious to find out he was human too. This is the cost of projection. When someone sees your calm and overlays it with their longing for stability, they stop seeing you. You become a symbol, a rock. And if you move, even slightly, they panic. They accuse you of changing when in truth you've been shifting for a long time, just silently. Jung believed projection was one of the most dangerous psychological forces because it robs people of their autonomy and robs you of your identity. In this warped mirror, your value lies not in who you are, but in what others extract from you. And here's the deeper tragedy. Empaths often internalize these projections. They begin to believe that their worth really does depend on how steady, available, and emotionally invincible they seem. They silence their pain. They laugh off their limits. They push through exhaustion, not for glory, but to avoid disappointing the people who expect them to always hold the weight. But what happens when they can't? What happens when they finally whisper, "I'm not okay," and the room goes cold? When Jamal returned to work, something had changed. Not in him, but in them. Some colleagues avoided him. Others treated him like he'd failed a sacred duty. Only a few asked how he really was. And that was the revelation. Many didn't love him. They loved the emotional function he served. His boundary had exposed their dependency. Their panic revealed the projection, and as painful as that truth was, it was also freeing. Because for the first time, Jamal understood this wasn't about him. It never was. So ask yourself, have you ever been punished for finally speaking up? Have you ever watched someone turn cold the moment you stopped being their anchor? That's projection unraveling. That's the cost of being the symbol instead of the self. Jung wrote, "The greatest burden a child must bear is the unlived life of the parents. But in adulthood, that burden shifts. It becomes the unlived emotional life of everyone around you, placed quietly on your shoulders. You don't owe anyone your silence. You don't have to be their emotional lifeboat just because they never learned how to swim. And if walking away makes you the villain in their story, so be it. That story was never yours to carry. When people only love your strength, they don't really see you. It starts so quietly, you don't even notice it. At first, people say you're calming, easy to talk to. "You just get me," they say, as if you have some supernatural ability to soothe chaos. And maybe you do. But here's the twist. The more calm you offer, the more others begin to need it. Soon, you're not just a friend, a partner, a co-worker. You're their emotional anchor, their unofficial therapist, the person they vent to, cry to, depend on. Not because you asked for that role, but because they assigned it to you. This is the hidden force of projection. Carl Jung warned, projections change the world into the replica of one's own unknown face. What people see in you may not be who you are. It's what they're missing in themselves. Take Jamal, for instance, a soft-spoken team lead at a non-profit. He never raised his voice, never complained. Always knew how to step in when someone was struggling. Over time, his office became the place people came to cry, to confess, to unload. Even his boss relied on him to keep the emotional culture healthy. But what no one saw was that Jamal hadn't slept well in weeks. His chest felt tight every morning. He'd begun dreading messages, afraid it was just another person who needed more from him. When he finally told his team he needed a mental health week, the response wasn't supportive. It was confusion. But you're the strong one. You're abandoning us. No one meant to be cruel, but they had confused his calm with capacity, his kindness with infinite strength, and they were furious to find out he was human too. This is the cost of projection. When someone sees your calm and overlays it with their longing for stability, they stop seeing you. You become a symbol, a rock, and if you move, even slightly, they panic. They accuse you of changing, when in truth, you've been shifting for a long time, just silently. Jung believed projection was one of the most dangerous psychological forces because it robs people of their autonomy and robs you of your identity. In this warped mirror, your value lies not in who you are, but in what others extract from you. And here's the deeper tragedy. Empaths often internalize these projections. They begin to believe that their worth really does depend on how steady, available, and emotionally invincible they seem. They silence their pain. They laugh off their limits. They push through exhaustion, not for glory, but to avoid disappointing the people who expect them to always hold the weight. But what happens when they can't? What happens when they finally whisper, "I'm not okay," and the room goes cold? When Jamal returned to work, something had changed. Not in him, but in them. Some colleagues avoided him. Others treated him like he'd failed a sacred duty. Only a few asked how he really was. And that was the revelation. Many didn't love him. They loved the emotional function he served. When people only love your strength, they don't really see you. It starts so quietly, you don't even notice it. At first, people say you're calming, easy to talk to. "You just get me," they say, as if you have some supernatural ability to soothe chaos. And maybe you do. But here's the twist. The more calm you offer, the more others begin to need it. Soon, you're not just a friend, a partner, a co-worker. You're their emotional anchor, their unofficial therapist, the person they vent to, cry to, depend on. Not because you asked for that role, but because they assigned it to you. This is the hidden force of projection. Carl Jung warned, projections change the world into the replica of one's own unknown face. What people see in you may not be who you are, it's what they're missing in themselves. Take Jamal, for instance, a soft-spoken team lead at a non-profit. He never raised his voice, never complained, always knew how to step in when someone was struggling. Over time, his office became the place people came to cry, to confess, to unload. Even his boss relied on him to keep the emotional culture healthy. But what no one saw was that Jamal hadn't slept well in weeks. His chest felt tight every morning. He'd begun dreading messages, afraid it was just another person who needed more from him, SARS. When he finally told his team he needed a mental health week, the response wasn't supportive. It was confusion. "But you're the strong one. You're abandoning us." No one meant to be cruel, but they had confused his calm with capacity, his kindness with infinite strength, and they were furious to find out he was human too. This is the cost of projection. When someone sees your calm and overlays it with their longing for stability, they stop seeing you. You become a symbol, a rock. And if you move, even slightly, they panic. They accuse you of changing, when in truth you've been shifting for a long time, just silently. Jung believed projection was one of the most dangerous psychological forces because it robs people of their autonomy and robs you of your identity. In this warped mirror, your value lies not in who you are, but in what others extract from you. And here's the deeper tragedy. Empaths often internalize these projections. They begin to believe that their worth really does depend on how steady, available, and emotionally invincible they seem. They silence their pain. They laugh off their limits. They push through exhaustion, not for glory, but to avoid disappointing the people who expect them to always hold the weight. But what happens when they can't? What happens when they finally whisper, "I'm not okay," and the room goes cold? When Jamal returned to work, something had changed. Not in him, but in them. Some colleagues avoided him, others treated him like he'd failed a sacred duty. Only a few asked how he really was. And that was the revelation. Many didn't love him, they loved the emotional function he served. His boundary had exposed their dependency, their panic revealed the projection. And as painful as that truth was, it was also freeing. Because for the first time, Jamal understood this wasn't about him. It never was. So ask yourself, have you ever been punished for finally speaking up? Have you ever watched someone turn cold the moment you stopped being their anchor? That's projection unraveling. That's the cost of being the symbol instead of the self. Jung wrote, "The greatest burden a child must bear is the unlived life of the parents." But in adulthood, that burden shifts. It becomes the unlived emotional life of everyone around you, placed quietly on your shoulders. You don't owe anyone your silence. You don't have to be their emotional lifeboat just because they never learned how to swim. And if walking away makes you the villain in their story, so be it. That story was never yours to carry. When people only love your strength, they don't really see you. There comes a moment when silence becomes unbearable, even for the empath. A moment when the weight of everyone else's needs finally collapses inward, and they are left staring at the wreckage of their own forgotten self. That moment is not loud, it's not dramatic, it's quiet. Still, but it changes everything. This is the loneliness of awakening. For years, the empath has been everyone's refuge, their steady friend, their crisis hotline, their emotional oxygen mask, and because they've worn that mask for so long, people stopped seeing the face beneath it. They loved the version of the empath that didn't complain, didn't demand, didn't flinch. But that version was never real. It was a persona, what Jung described as a system of behavior that is partly dictated by society and partly by the individual's own expectations. The empath became what others needed, and in doing so, forgot to ask, "What do I need?" Carl Jung once said, "Loneliness does not come from being alone, but from being unable to communicate the things that seem important to oneself." For the empath, awakening is not just about setting boundaries, it's about finally speaking, saying the things they were too afraid to say. "I'm tired, I need help, I don't want to carry this anymore." But when they speak, they realize something painful. Most people only loved the silence. They loved the emotional convenience, not the emotional truth. And so the empath walks through their awakening with fewer people beside them. This is the heartbreak of individuation, that becoming whole sometimes means becoming alone. Jung called individuation the process of integrating the conscious with the unconscious, the self with the shadow. But as the empath integrates, they also shed. The friends who can't handle the truth fall away. The relationships built on their self-erasure dissolve. At first, it feels like punishment, like betrayal. But it's neither. It's clarity. And clarity is not always kind. Still, something remarkable happens in the rubble. A few people stay. A friend who says, "I miss you, but I understand." A sibling who doesn't guilt them for needing space. These are the real ones. The ones who see behind the persona and still choose to love. They become the soil where new roots take hold. Relationships not built on performance, but presence. Awakening is lonely, but it's also honest. Not everyone will love the real you, but the ones who do will never ask you to break for them again. There comes a moment, silent, slow, and often terrifying, when the empath stops smiling, stops nodding, stops making themselves small to keep the peace. It doesn't happen in a dramatic outburst or some climactic confrontation. It happens in the quiet refusal to keep pretending. That's the real turning point, when an empath no longer strives to be liked, but chooses instead to be whole. And make no mistake, that choice costs something, especially when you've spent a lifetime being applauded for your niceness. Carl Jung believed that true growth begins not in comfort, but in confrontation. And for the empath, that confrontation begins with a simple, trembling word: no. No, I won't absorb your chaos today. No, I won't betray my own needs again. No, I won't keep hiding my truth just to remain agreeable. But here's the twist. At first, it doesn't feel empowering. It feels like failure, like betrayal. Because when your persona, the mask Jung says we wear to function in society, is built around harmony, stepping into your shadow feels like war. This is where most empaths falter. They confuse peacekeeping with peace. They believe kindness means silence. But Jung warned, the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. And accepting yourself completely means acknowledging not just your compassion, but your exhaustion, your boundaries, your anger, your truth. That is what wholeness demands. Not surface-level approval, but deep integration. Consider the story of Armin, a team lead at a mental health non-profit. Known for his grace under pressure, his open-door policy, and his quiet strength, Armin was the anchor everyone clung to. Co-workers vented to him, clients leaned on him, his supervisor called him the heart of the team. But no one noticed the subtle signs, the way his shoulders slumped just a little more each day, the way his laughter faded into a polite smile, the way his eyes stopped lighting up in meetings. Until one day, Armin stopped showing up. No warning, no email, just absence. A week later, his resignation letter arrived. Clear, direct, unapologetic. He had chosen therapy, solitude, and silence over saving everyone else. Some were shocked, others called it selfish, but for Armin, it was survival. This is the paradox of the empath's awakening. The more they choose wholeness, the more others may resent them, because niceness is predictable, palatable. But wholeness disrupts. It sets boundaries. It refuses to play the role anymore. And it's here that the empath steps into individuation, Jung's term for the courageous act of becoming your true self, separate from the expectations, projections, and personas that once defined you. Imagine standing at the center of a storm, the eye of it. Everything swirls around you, opinions, disappointments, people walking away. But you're still. Because for the first time, you're not spinning for anyone. You're not earning your worth. You're not dimming your light. You're not nodding when your soul screams, no. You are whole. Flawed, perhaps, but real. And that is the point of no return. Once an empath tastes wholeness, niceness loses its sweetness, because they see it for what it was, a costume, a performance, a cage, and cages, no matter how golden, are still cages. Niceness is a costume. Wholeness is your birthright. There's a moment, quiet, private, often unnoticed, when a person realizes the role they've been playing isn't their truth anymore. And for empaths, that moment isn't a loud rebellion. It's a quiet refusal, a slow exhale, a whispered no more. You see, empaths don't set out to be saviors. They become them. Slowly, by necessity, by conditioning, by silent agreements made in childhood, they learn that love is earned, that attention is safest when it's earned through service. And so the mask forms, not to deceive, but to survive. Carl Jung called it the persona, the social face we wear to meet the world. And for the empath, the persona is strength, serenity, endless compassion. But beneath it, the self waits, fractured, unheard, gasping. Consider Noah, a respected school principal known for his unwavering support of students and staff alike. He's the first one in, the last to leave, the calm voice during a crisis. But no one sees what happens after the school bell rings. No one sees him collapse into silence at home, unable to speak, to feel, to connect. His wife once asked him why he never shares what's wrong. He smiled and said, "Because someone has to hold it all together." But even the strongest beams crack under pressure. One evening, after a parent falsely accused him of negligence, Noah didn't fight back. He just nodded, left the room, and went home. For the first time in 20 years, he took a mental health leave. The staff was shocked. Noah, but he's the rock. They didn't realize that even rocks erode silently, invisibly from the inside out. Jung warned us of this erosion. People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul. The soul of the empath has been buried beneath roles for so long that touching it feels dangerous. But healing begins with confrontation, with looking in the mirror and saying, "I'm not okay, and I don't have to be." It's terrifying, because the role is familiar, it's rewarded. Society praises the unbreakable, but the cost is silent suffering. Emotional starvation, a self that is never fully met. Letting go of the role doesn't always mean dramatic exits or tearful speeches. Sometimes it's not replying to a text. It's skipping a call. It's saying, "I can't help with that today." And suddenly, the world reacts. People get upset. They call you distant, selfish, changed. But what's really changed is that, for once, you're choosing you. Choosing to feel without fixing. To rest without guilt. To be seen without saving. It's a season of silence where the empath unlearns. Unlearns how to filter feelings for the comfort of others. Unlearns how to perform strength. Unlearns how to equate love with usefulness. And it hurts. Because some people disappear. The ones who love the role, not the person behind it. But what remains is something purer. A life that isn't scripted by service. A soul that isn't a background character in its own story. In this process, Jung's idea of individuation takes shape, the journey of becoming whole, of integrating shadow and light, of no longer needing a role to feel worthy. The empath, once the silent healer, becomes something far rarer, a human being who feels, who falters, who speaks, and still deserves love. Noah, after months away from work, returned changed. He was quieter. He didn't pick up every burden. He no longer answered emails after 6 p.m. Some staff whispered he wasn't the same, but one student, whose father had recently died, found herself sitting in his office. Noah didn't try to fix her pain. He just said, "Me too." That was the first time she cried in front of anyone, and somehow it helped her breathe. Jung once wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." And that begins with surrender, surrendering the applause, the role, the mask. Because true strength is not holding everything together, it's having the courage to let go. You are not born to carry everyone, you are born to become yourself. Sometimes the most powerful realizations come not from looking outward, but from daring to look inward. You think you know yourself. You think you're the helper, the calm one, the one who's always there. But one day, something cracks. A strange sadness arrives. Not loud, not dramatic, just quiet, unrelenting, like a fog in your bones. You brush it off. You keep showing up, keep smiling, but it lingers. That's when it hits you. You're not just carrying your emotions. You've been carrying everyone's. For years, Carl Jung warned us about this. The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely, he said. And for the empath, that's the final mountain. Because to truly accept yourself, you must admit something painful, that the love you gave so freely was not always returned, that your calm was often taken for granted, that your silence was mistaken for strength, when it was really survival. Take the story of Adrian, a middle school teacher, beloved by students, trusted by colleagues. If someone was overwhelmed, Adrian stepped in. If the principal needed someone to calm a rowdy class, Adrian was cold. Everyone admired him, but no one noticed when his shoulders sagged, when he stopped playing music in the morning, when his laughs turned into polite nods. Until one day he called in sick and never came back. His resignation email was short, polite, but the last line said everything. I can't be everyone's anchor if I'm drowning. This is projection in action, one of Jung's deepest warnings. When we don't understand ourselves, we project our needs onto others. For many, the empath becomes the projection screen. People see them as unshakable because they need them to be unshakable. They need a container for their chaos, and when that container finally shatters, they say, "You've changed." But the truth is, they were never looking at you, only their reflection in you. This moment, the empath's awakening, is equal parts clarity and grief. Because suddenly, you see it. The relationships built on convenience. The people who called only when they needed something. The silence after you set your first boundary. Jung called this withdrawing the projection. It's when you stop being who others need and start becoming who you are. Not everyone will like that version, but that's the cost of truth. And here's the twist no one talks about. Sometimes you are projecting too. Your need to be needed. Your desire to be loved through service. Your fear that if you stopped helping, you'd stop mattering. Jung believed every relationship is a mirror. And when the empath stops mirroring others, they finally see what's missing, their own reflection. You might be reading this and thinking, I'm not the empath. But maybe you depended on one. Maybe you drained someone without realizing. Maybe you mistook their silence for peace. Or maybe you are them. And this is the first time you've let yourself feel how heavy the mask has become. If so, take a breath. You're not alone. The mask was never meant to be permanent. Here's the real gift of Jung's work. It doesn't shame you for wearing the mask. It helps you take it off. Gently, slowly, with compassion. Because beneath it, there is a child who never got to rest. A soul who was always strong for others, but never allowed to collapse. Let that child speak. Let that soul breathe. And so, the mirror turns, not just on others, but on you. It reflects both ways. Empaths don't need to be stronger. They need to be seen.